Welcome to Everything Casual, bringing you original football casual videos from the golden era of the 80s and 90s, right up to current day. Football away day stories and historic clashes between football firms. Subscribe so you don't miss out. We upload videos every week. For today's video, I really want to share with you one of my favourite books by a lad called Grange, Steve Granger. Just a normal football lad like me and you, he has followed Manchester United literally all over the world and has many good away day stories to tell. Every chapter in his book is a story about a different away day, a different city or country, a different fixture. Steve's books are slightly different from anything else out there, because as well as being a good football lad, Grange is a funny guy and his stories will have you laughing out loud, as well as telling gritty, real football battles he has been involved with. Grange is a Brummie Red, a gang of lads that are Manchester United crazy, that travel every game from Birmingham to Manchester, and they have a big following. Now, as well as the usual rivalry against Liverpool, Man City and so on, the Brummie Reds hate Aston Villa. This video is a story about a big clash that happened between the Manchester United lads and the Villa mob. If you enjoy the story, please take a look at Steve's book. I have left a link in the description, just click on it. Right, let's go. This is Steve's story. For 99% of Brummie Reds, our games against the Villa were as big as a City or Liverpool game. I was looking forward to the game more than usual, partly because I had missed the previous season's 2-2 draw after time spent that Saturday afternoon locked up in Steelhouse Lane, Nick. I was arrested after a bit of bother outside the Grand Hotel and was dragged into the back of a black Mariah, and after a very short ride to Steelhouse Lane, and without any of my details being taken, was unceremoniously thrown headfirst into a cell. At around about 5 o'clock, I was rudely awakened and taken out of the cell and placed in a large room where the custody sergeant proceeded to write up the arrest papers for about 20 young shoplifters. I had been sitting in the room for roughly 10 minutes, and I noticed that, even though a few coppers were coming in and out with various undesirables, they were only shouting their prisoners' charges to the sergeant. Drunk and disorderly theft, criminal damage. Then the coppers would just dump the accused in a chair and exit the room, leaving the custody sergeant as the only copper in the room. Even though the room I was sitting in had frosted windows, you could tell we were right next to the street. This gave me an idea. I would try my luck and follow the copper through the door. With the door only a few yards away, I briefly waited, then tried the handle. What a effing result, it was unlocked. I opened a second door and spotted the main entrance to the Nick, which was just to my right, so I casually strolled out of the front door and legged it down the road to track down the lads in whichever boozer they were in. On the day of the game, our usual little crew met Jed, and about 30 Manchester lads off the early train. As soon as I saw Jed, I could tell he wasn't particularly happy. He soon told me that the infamous Spud had latched himself onto his little mob. The first time we were introduced, I witnessed Spud knocking out 2 bouncers who had tried to eject him from a nightclub. When I saw the film Trainspotting, the character Begbie, played by Robert Carlyle, instantly reminded me of Spud. What a coincidence that one of Begbie's mates in the film was also called Spud. As often was the case, Spud had been terrorising everyone, including the United fans on the train down from Piccadilly, with his favourite, "Have you got 10p, mate?" Spud was so mean, moody and menacing that very few people refused. He collected so many 10 pences, which he crammed into his jeans pockets, that he walked like John Wayne. Spud was a very handy lad, and when sober could be a good crack, but after a few sherbets, oh dear. Later at the bar, Spud asked, "So where's all these Villa wankers, Grange?" Thinking on my feet, I told him that Villa didn't come into the city centre when United were in town. Spud immediately replied, "Well, we will go and find them in the Holt End later then." With that, he went around the pub telling everyone that we were all going into the Holt that day. Moving up to one of our favourite haunts, the Windsor, we passed a little trendy wine bar where a few of the boys spotted a very tasty girl behind the bar counter. The look on the girl's face was priceless, as 40 lads walked through the door into the deserted bar. Soon, everyone was ordering big rounds and confusing the girl by continually requesting extra drinks or telling her she had charged them the wrong amount. Also, when bottles were placed on the bar counter, the lads simply took them and walked off without paying. She was in a right state and unsurprisingly threatening to call the old bill. Spud tried to charm the young girl, and he told her to calm down and get him a sarnie, and in return, he would get the money off the lads. She nervously agreed, but the moment her back was turned to make his sarnie, Spud leant over the food chiller and lifted a whole chicken and unceremoniously devoured it, like someone in a medieval feast, with bits of chicken all around his mouth and hanging off his chin. Before the girl had turned around to give Spud his sarnie, he quickly threw the half-eaten bird back into the food chiller, but was still chomping on a mouthful of chicken. The bar girl looked gobsmacked, as Spud stood to attention as if to say, "It wasn't me," even though there were bits of chicken falling out of his mouth. When she saw the left-over chicken carcass in the food chiller, she gave out a loud scream. For a few seconds Spud tried to console the girl, but as she picked up the phone, Spud shouted out, "Forget the sarnie, darling. I'm not hungry anymore." Then once again, he dived into the food chiller and not only retrieved his half-eaten chicken, but also a couple of quiches as well. When she saw Spud helping himself to food again, she flipped. In one movement she dropped the phone and picked up a water jug and ran around the bar to attack Spud. To our surprise, he was out the door like a shot. Normally, he would have chinned her, but instead he ran up Needless Alley, holding his chicken and quiches. We later caught up with Spud in the Windsor bar, with bits of food still all round his face and on his clothes, demanding that all the United fans in the pub should go in the Holt end, and of course they all nodded in agreement, finished their drinks, and left the pub. Martin S. knew a lot of Villa fans, and one of them had wandered into the Windsor and was chatting with Martin for a few minutes, when the Villa fan jokingly said to Martin that being in a pub packed full of United fans, he thought that by now one of them would have taken a pop at him. Unfortunately for the Villa fan, this was in earshot of Spud, who responded, "So, why would you think someone would hit you?" "'Cause I'm Villa," came the reply. Wrong answer, of course, and without hesitation Spud nutted him, sending him flying over a nearby table. As soon as the Villa fan was back on his feet, he was out of the door. Now, I'm not sure if that particular Villa fan was responsible for what followed, but not long after he had stumbled out the door, a mob of Villa turned up and smashed a few of the pub windows. Carrying a small bar stool in one hand and a pint glass in the other, Spud was one of the first out the door. It went off big style, and to be fair, the Villa lads were very game. Most of the United mob were laden with bottles, glasses, and broken bits of furniture, and Villa were sent running back down the alley. When we arrived back inside the pub and were waiting to be served, the Villa mob returned. However, this time they were almost twice as many, and not only from the front of the pub, but they also charging in through the small back door. There was now a pitch battle outside in the alley and punch-ups inside the boozer. I was stuck inside, and everything that could be used as a weapon was used. Several United fans were behind the bar throwing glasses and bottles, and even glass from the broken windows was thrown at the Villa fans. By the time the old Bill turned up, the pub was completely wrecked and resembled a war zone. The old Bill steamed in with their truncheons flying in all directions, and their dogs were biting anything that moved. Once the law was on the scene, most of the Reds headed off to New Street Station to get the train to Villa Park. There were hundreds of United trying to cram onto the train, and the Villa fans that were already on it were given a few slaps and thrown back onto the platform. Partly due to all the excitement at the Windsor bar, United went balmy on the train, and even though we were only on it for 5 minutes, our carriage looked like a bomb had gone off by the time we arrived at Whitton Station. Seats had been slashed and ripped, all the light fittings had been smashed, and a couple of the windows had been kicked through. After we got off the train, about 50 of us, made our way to the Holt end and went through the turnstiles in dribs and drabs. I was with Jed and Clive, and as we got through the turnstiles, Clive said, in the worst Brummie accent I've ever heard, "Where's the programmes?" Right away, a dozen or so Villa fans turned around and gave us daggers. When most of us were inside the ground, we made our way down to the corner flag next to the Whitton Lane, where United were seated. As soon as the players came onto the pitch, we started chanting, "United, United." Then the fun and games began. At first we held our own, but when we celebrated United's first goal, a load more Villa surrounded us. For once, I was grateful for the police intervention. If it wasn't bad enough being continually verbally abused and spat at, with the amount of hostile Villa fans around us, it would have been suicide for any of us to go to the Kazi. So not long after, there were a few steaming rivers of piss continually running down the terraces, which was nice. Towards the end of the game, there were so many Villa surrounding us that the coppers were stretched to breaking point. When United scored their third goal, we went crazy, and so did the home supporters, but obviously for different reasons. They charged through the overstretched police cordon, and within seconds we were completely overrun, and for the last few minutes were kicked all over the place. When police reinforcements eventually arrived, we were happily escorted out of the Holt end and into the United section of the Whitton Lane seats. At the final whistle, we all poured out of the seats into Whitton Lane and were greeted by a large mob of Villa, and just like in the Holt, we were massively outnumbered. However, this battle-hardened bunch of tearaways stood their ground, and we went toe-to-toe with them. Soon, from behind us, I heard a massive roar as a large United contingent came running out of the away end of the ground and charged up Whitton Lane to join us in battle. As soon as United had superior numbers, the Villa mob did an about turn and legged it. Many of them ran back into the Holt end. However, there must have been a couple of hundred of us who gave chase and went charging into the Holt, and soon Villa were run all over the place. A 3-0 away win and running the Villa. Double result. After the game we headed for the city centre and found Sam Weller's, one of the few pubs that opened before 7:30 and located at the back of New Street Station. The pub had 2 bar counters, but only during the early evening was the front bar manned. The front bar was pretty packed, so once we had been served, we went up the small set of stairs to the elevated back bar. It wasn't long before a couple of the Manchester lads commented about the lack of bar staff, and Eddie pointed out that bar staff weren't usually in this room until after 8 p.m. Wonderful, I thought. There's no bar staff, and there are goodies openly on display. This was an opportunity just too good to miss. Bowie and Wilkie were the first to jump the bar and soon followed by the rest of us like a plague of locust, consuming everything in our path, swiping all the cigarettes off the shelves and removing all the bottles of spirits from the optics. We also grabbed a crate of Nuki Brown, and Eddie, being Eddie, got himself 6 bags of crisps. When I questioned him over this and pointed out that he could have grabbed fags or bottles of spirits, he replied, "I'm effing starving." We nicknamed him Benny after that. Not wishing to push my luck, we hid our booty about our person and headed out of the pub. We made a bit of a noise as we left, because most of us had a couple of bottles of spirits that clanked and chinked together as we walked. Eddie didn't have that problem. He just rustled. After we left Sam Weller's, our first port of call was the Chippy. Much to the delight and surprise of the 2 kids serving us, we traded a pack of 20B and H for pie and chips. After we'd had a little feed, we went back in search of a pub. Frustratingly, we were refused entry from the few pubs we found open, so we strolled up to the Grand Hotel, the scene of my arrest the previous year. Even though the Grand was a bit pricey, this wasn't going to be a problem as we had our own supplies. The normal clientele in the Grand were middle-aged couples and theatre-goers, all quietly sipping on their G&Ts and cocktails. We obviously stood out like a sore thumb, and understandably got a look of amazement from the barmaid when we ordered 12 mixers and loads of ice. While I was waiting for the mixers, I couldn't help but notice one of the bar staff arguing with a well-dressed man in his 40s. The bloke was clearly pissed and was insisting on another G&T, but his request was falling on deaf ears. When we got our supply of mixers and glasses, we carried them over to a table in a quiet corner so we could top up our glasses with our own spirits. The pissed up bloke must have been eagle-eyed because he clocked us straight away. He ordered a tonic water and slithered across the room to join our little party. "Hello boys, my name's Roger," he said, putting his arms around Bowie and Jed. "Couldn't help but notice the bottles you boys are sharing around. The bastards won't serve me here. Any chance of a top-up?" Roger had the style of Terry Thomas and the deepest voice I had ever heard. He made Orson Welles sound like a castrated choir boy. We all gave him a load of stick, but he was very game, and he was determined to get a drink out of us. With a big grin on his mush, he continued, "Okay boys, I will have a bet with you. If I win, you can top up my glass, and if I lose, you can take me outside and kick the shit out of me." Bowie's immediate response was, "We're going to kick the shit out of you anyway, so F off." After a bit more banter with Roger, we agreed. If he won the bet, he could have a drink. Then Dave asked him what the bet was. "I bet I've got a bigger pair of bollocks than any of you fairies," Roger groaned. In a flash, Bowie and Dave had their trousers around their ankles, and Bowie said proudly, "Look at these for a pair of a donkey bollocks." Roger slowly pushed Dave and Bowie's shirts to one side so he could have a good view, then said, "Call them a pair of bollocks. I've seen bigger marbles than those." With that, Roger dropped his trousers and produced the most enormous pair of bollocks I had ever seen. We all stared open-mouthed. His bollocks were the size of tennis balls. Seeing that we were suitably impressed, Roger proclaimed in his croaky voice, "You've probably just seen the biggest pair of bollocks in the world. Now fill up my fucking glass." Bowie was still in a state of shock, and with his trousers still around his ankles, he shuffled over to a couple of old dears and said, "Hey girls, have you seen the size of that bloke's bollocks? They're massive." The sight of Bowie's wedding tackle dangled in front of them was too much to bear, and they were up and out of their seats like a shot. Unperturbed, Bowie continued shuffling around the room, proclaiming that Roger's bollocks were the eighth wonder of the world. Bowie then nicknamed him Roger the Bollock. Bowie and Roger the Bollock were sipping on their G&Ts with their trousers still around their ankles when the old Bill turned up to throw us out of the hotel. "Bleeding hell, mate, you should see the bollocks on this bloke," Bowie shouted over to the coppers as they made their way towards us. At the sight of Roger's enormous bollocks, the first two coppers stopped in their tracks and stared in amazement for a few seconds. These coppers were sound, and judging by their big grins, they definitely saw the funny side of things. The heavy mob who came charging in shortly after were a completely different story. Chaos ensued after they found out we had our own bottles of spirits. Roger the Bollock managed to pick up a couple of bottles that we had stashed behind some chairs and sneaked them out. Most of the lads were refusing to give up their drink and wrestled with the coppers to keep possession of the bottles. Joe H. had two coppers trying to relieve him of his drink, but while they struggled with each other, Joe managed to remove the tops and said, "I'd rather throw the effing stuff away than let you bastards have it." He then proceeded to empty the contents of the bottles onto the floor and all over the two coppers. That little act of rebellion resulted in a couple of nights in the cells and a hefty fine when he appeared in court the following Monday morning. Jed, Bowie and Wilkie were staying overnight at my flat, and when we arrived in the early hours of Sunday morning, I found a box of eggs on the doorstep. I'd asked my girlfriend to get me some sausages, bacon, eggs and bread so I could do the lads a breakfast. Seeing just a box of eggs outside my door, I thought the silly cow had forgotten the rest of the supplies. Cursing her, I tried to open the front door, but initially it would only open a few inches. After putting my weight behind the door, It opened a little wider, and I couldn't believe what was on the floor. In her infinite wisdom, my girlfriend thought if she left all the food on the doorstep it would be stolen, so she had posted the string of sausages, individual rashers of bacon and slices of bread one by one through the letterbox. I suppose I was lucky she didn't post the bleeding eggs through as well. This is just one chapter from many in Steve Granger's book, Read All Over Grange. Has some very good, very funny stories about his adventures abroad with the Manchester United mob. The book is honestly worth checking out, not just for Manchester United fans, but for anyone that is a fan of football casual or away day books. If you feel you have a good story to tell and would like it featured on a future video, then get in touch. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you subscribe, you will be notified when we release a new video. It could be your firm we make a video about next, so don't miss out and hit the subscribe button. You can find me on Facebook or email me if you have a good story to tell. See you next time.